It started with it kind of talking to John and Keith pre-pandemic, so probably late 2019, and I noticed the memorial stone. We've been here about 5 years. Memorial stone talked about how it would be 150 years old on the 20th of July, 2020. So I thought, wow, what a great thing to do in concert with the History Society. It'll be summertime, we'll be outside, with lemonade and all that. And lo and behold, the pandemic came to town, and the good news is it was only me as a single act, and it was in the village hall. But over these 2 years, I've gotten to know Harvey, and he's an absolutely amazing human being. And sorry, there's no one better to talk about the chapel than Harvey, so you're in for a treat tonight. Boring stuff, we're going to talk about toilets. If you go out the door and to the left past 2 bedrooms, you'll see a bathroom. We have a Ukrainian family staying with us, so those are the 2 bedrooms. Don't wander in and have a nosy. So the bathroom there, and then down the stairs, 18 steps. We have a loo off to the right, and those of you who ever did Sunday school or anything like that, you know exactly where it is. Right. Have I missed anything, Sarah? Oh yes. All of the rooms, there you go. All of the rooms in the house have been redecorated except for this one. So don't judge us. Okay, so the man who is worth a big build-up is the Revd. Harvey. So if you want to take it away, please, Harvey Richardson.
Thanks very much. Thank you so much. This gives me an opportunity to say to you, Joe and Sarah, deep appreciation for allowing us to come into your home and to spend this time with you. We are so grateful for all that you've made possible and all the preparations. So thank you very much for your hospitality and your kindness. Yeah. Thank you. Well, everyone, it's a great delight to be standing in this chapel. As you can now grasp, this was built in 1870, this very building, the year when Charles Dickens died. The foundation stone for this building was laid the day after the Franco-Prussian War started, and so you'll get some sense of the history, and we hope that in the short time we've got tonight you'll be able to capture something of the impact of society and the way in which the Wesleyan Methodist movement had great inroads here in this village. So I have here a slide to show you which is not of Shepherdswell. I hasten to add, I think it's a camp meeting in the United States, actually, Joe. I'm not sure which state it is. But I wanted to put this up because we need to take you all back to the late 1830s and the early 1840s and try to imagine what Shepherdswell would have been like. We do know from a newspaper cutting that there were groups of Methodists who met on, inverted commas, the Green in 1840 for open-air religious meetings. They couldn't meet in the church because the Methodists were out of favour. They were too enthusiastic. And so they would meet in the open air. And so preachers used to come out from places like Lyminge and Dover and would come and stand on the Green. Now, I've discovered that the Green is not our Green here, because where the Green is in Shepherdswell, that was a pond in the 1840s. But I have been helpfully informed that the Green could well have been an area near where the East Kent Railway is at the moment. So groups of Methodists were meeting in the open air, and some of the farmers in the area used to send their workers to create a disturbance to try and disrupt these raving Methodist preachers. So there's a little bit of background. And now I wanted to put this up because very quickly the open-air Methodists wanted to be able to meet with other Methodists in a safe place. And we know that they met in Wootton in what was a converted oast house. If you go to the far side of the Liddon racetrack and down the hill, at the bottom there I think is it a cattery there? Does that ring a bell with anybody? But I think there was an oast house there at one time, and the Methodists used to meet in there. I've just put this screen up because, well, Joe has very kindly, just to indicate that it's important that the background to our chapel life is seen in context with lots of other Methodist places of worship. Shepherdswell became one of many, and Wootton, this place of worship, met 2:30, 2:30 on a Sunday afternoon, 6 o'clock in the evening, and on a Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock. These numbers refer to numbered preachers. That's where their names are. And so on the 4th of August, number 23 was preaching at 2:30. Now, we blocked out number 23, whatever it is. Anyway, it gives you an idea. And these are all the Wesleyan Methodist places of worship, and the people on the green who'd been meeting in the open air then gathered at Wootton for a while. Thanks, Joe. And here's a more updated one. This is 1859. You can see the names of the preachers. They've now got initials as well as surnames, and where they live. And here again, but this is the intriguing thing, Shepherdswell is listed as having a service here. Well, not here, but in the village at 2:30 and at 6 o'clock on a Sunday, and on a Monday night at 7 o'clock. And these are the preachers. I'm just seeing if you know. Could you go back to another screen, Joe, please? And number 20. Oh no, we haven't got the preachers now. Sorry, we still haven't got it. Doesn't matter. Let's go back, can we?
Can I just say, it's very interesting, Harvey, that date. That's before the railway, and it's written down Shepherdswell.
Yes, how intriguing. Yes, thank you. And the other thing is that there's a little S there. If you can ever see an S against a number, on C, S. Oh no, it's not the S I want.
The Lord's Supper.
Yes, the Lord's Supper. That indicates when the sacrament of Holy Communion was conducted. In other words, that's when an ordained preacher would come out and preach in Shepherdswell. Okay, going on. Thanks very much, Jay, for that one. Now, this is what is most intriguing. In the last few years, we've discovered that this building on Mill Lane, do you recognise it, anybody?
Yeah.
This was originally built as a Wesleyan chapel in 1846. And this handsome man here has the great name of the Revd Theophilus Pugh. And he was the superintendent minister who lived in Dover and had oversight of all those chapels listed on that preaching plan. Now here, this building was built in 1846. It's made of flints. It has no foundations. The people who'd gone over to Wootton and who first started to meet in the open air, they decided they wanted to have their own place where they could worship in Shepherdswell. And the farmer at Westcourt Farm, with the name of John Jacob, who was a sympathiser of the Church of England, but was also very interested in the Methodists, unlike most of the Anglicans at the time. He said, you can collect flintstones from my land at night time, as long as you do it at night time, and you can build your chapel. So they did, and they built the chapel. But as soon as they started to build the wall, there was this huge storm, and the walls fell down. And the next Sunday, the preacher in St Andrew's Church, which incidentally at that time was not the church you know now, but its predecessor. He was the name of the Revd de Clare. He was a very old man, and he got up into the pulpit, and this was just after the storm had blown down the walls. He stood in the pulpit and read this from the Bible, Ezekiel. Say unto them which daub it with untempered mortar, that it shall fall. There shall be an overflowing shower, and ye, O great hailstones, shall fall, and a stormy wind shall rend it. And he preached and railed against the Methodists. That was the background to that chapel. And in 1851, I expect many of you know that in 1851 there was not only the national census, but there was a religious census. It was a census of all the places of worship in Britain. And this place was listed, and it said that in an afternoon there were 78 people meeting in that place for worship. And in the evening at 6:30 there were 88 people meeting. But in the Church of England register, it said in the morning they had 100 people worshipping, and in the evening 100 people worshipping. I don't believe a word of it. There it goes. So there we are. There's the chapel that was built then. Now, soon after that was built, there was somebody who was the nephew of John Jacob who came to live at Westcourt Farm. His name was William Jacob. And he was a very enthusiastic Wesleyan Methodist. And he encouraged people to get together and say, let's build a really good chapel. And here it is. I don't know if you can read this, but... Oh, thank you, Joe. The day being fine, there was a good attendance. This is for the laying of the foundation stone. The total number of persons present, including the Sunday school children, being little short of 600.
Oh, wow.
That's more than the total population of the village. But that underlies the fact that the Methodist tradition involves people from lots of other places. So you can be sure that lots of other Methodist chapels would have sent people along. About 500 adjourned to the meadow. I don't know where that would have been. Kindly led by Mr. Hammond, and partook of tea, the evening being spent with the children, whose festival was held on the same day. The chapel, which is early English in style, would you believe? Well, interesting, being created or erected by Messrs. Tunbridge and Den from plans furnished by Mr. B.A. Tucker and calculated to meet 150 persons, having a schoolroom underneath us, 26 feet by 25 feet. I think that's most interesting. So thanks, Joe. That's on to the next one.
This is going to be a build, so we're going to zoom in.
Yes, thank you. Now, here, thank you. Yes, now this great day, July the 20th, 1870, the day that war broke, well, the day before, the war broke out between Prussia and France. And it was a very vicious battle. In fact, it's not that far away from us where the battle was taking place. But the special invited guest, Mr. D. Cooper Scott, Esquire, was unable to come because of the war, said the records. Now, I don't know what that would mean, whether the transport had been affected, because Britain was neutral in the Franco-Prussian War, although we did supply ambulances and medical support. And these other names are important because the Reverend Dr. Knowles did lay this foundation stone, although it says it was laid by Mr. Scott. And the Reverend H.P. Hughes, I want to just mention that name. He was the assistant minister for all the churches in the group of Methodist churches called the Circuit. And he lived and lodged with my great-grandfather and his family in Buckland, in Dover. And I've got a picture, I think. Yes, I thought you'd be interested. I'm not sure it's very...
Cut to Buckland.
Yeah, this is where my great-grandfather lived from 1866 till 1888. And this is the Wesleyan Chapel in Buckland. It's known to some of you, I guess, as the King's Hall, if you recognise it. And that was the house where my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, who had 10 children, and 2 lodgers, and the Wesleyan Methodist minister, all in that house. And there he is. This is my great-grandfather. Can you see the likeness? That's my granddad, and that's my grandma. And it's in this photograph, which was taken 30 years later than the founding of this chapel. This is in 1900, one of my great-aunt's wedding in North London. But I thought you might just be interested to see if you catch the likeness.
Oh, definitely.
Now this is interesting. Have you all noticed? Yeah. Thanks, Joe. I don't know if you've noticed that there is a sculpted Bible on the outside above us here. And Joe, you very, very wonderfully found the quotations. There are 3 quotations from the book of Isaiah. They're all from concurrent chapters, 53, 54, and 55. But you can just about see the lettering. They've got the chapter at the very top and then the Roman letters for chapter 53. Who hath believed? And then there are just scratches to indicate the rest of the chapter. And then here's another one, which is the next chapter, which I think I ought to be able to know what Isaiah 54 says, shouldn't I? But I need to just look it up. Sing, O barren, sing, it says there. And there's the rest of chapter 54, and then chapter 55, ho, everyone that thirsteth, and the rest of the chapter. So this sculpture on the top of the chapel is doing what they were doing in the open air, inviting people to hear the Christian message. Okay, must move on quickly. There's always a danger of Methodist ministers talking for too long, so I'll keep it going. One of the things that's been exercising us, I think, Sarah and Joe, is how we can try and recapture the sense of history of this place over 150 years. It's very difficult. One of the things I would like to stress is that I do believe that the legacy of this place involves an awareness of social justice and social Christianity, about what it means to live responsibly, lovingly and caringly in our society. And here's just something you may remember. Back in September we had our History Open Day in the village hall when we talked about all the pubs, and I gave a little talk about the Band of Hope and the temperance movement. Well, there are some very interesting facts here. This is 1874. There are in Dover 226 public houses, 76 grocers, 36 bakers, 33 butchers, 10 pork butchers, 60 greengrocers, showing a majority of 11 public houses over the aggregate numbers of all the other provision dealers enumerated. And it goes on to say, to enable them to pay rent, taxes and licences and to support their families, the average taking of these public houses must be at least £10 per week each, showing a weekly expenditure in Dover for intoxicating drinks of £2,260 and a yearly one of £117,520. I think that's just very interesting. That's Dover, that's not even Shepherdswell. Now I've put these 2 pictures. This is the Reverend Hugh Price Hughes, who was known to my great-grandfather because he lodged in our family home. He baptised my granddad. This is a lady called Josephine Butler. Now, have you come across Josephine Butler? Great social activist in the Victorian period. She came to Dover in 1870, the year when this chapel was built, and she was passionate about the justice that needed to be expressed over the Contagious Diseases Acts, which were going through Parliament at the time. And those acts were concerned with towns that had garrisons in them. So Dover was one of the key points. And one of the regulations in these Contagious Diseases Acts was that all the women in the town should be tested for contagious diseases. And Hugh Price Hughes, who at the time was 21, this was his first appointment as a Wesleyan minister, he called a meeting and had Josephine Butler present, and he was asking the question, but what about the men? Why do not the law test the men as well? And he caused quite a rumpus in the town. And he preached at the opening services in this chapel in 1870, and I'll bet your bottom dollar as a good Methodist that he would have encouraged people to think about the way they use their intoxicating liquor and how they behave towards men and women and their sexual habits. And I think that's an important contribution of this place. Go slowly, Gary. Oh yes, here's just another little demonstration of the social background. This is the Shepherdswell Band of Hope entertainment that was put on here in this chapel in 1914. There may be a name you recognise here. One of the dewdrops in the entertainment was P. Hogbin. I just want to mention that name, Hogbin. And I don't know if any of you can see any of the other names. There were all kinds of things, songs and sketches and lace makers. They obviously did a little drama. But I think that's interesting that I've got in my possession that document. This document I found in the county library. This is the membership roll in 1932 to 1933 of what was called the Wesley Guild. Now, the Wesley Guild was one of a number of groups in this chapel that was concerned for fullness and entertainment and for the fullness of life in every aspect of life. And people used to come once a week and join the Wesley Guild to grow and become more fulfilled as human beings. I thought it was interesting to have it. I think you can probably see the names. It's interesting to see the names and the addresses.
Harvey, I can see a name there.
Yes?
N. Mason, Darling Villas. She was the sister-in-law of Beth Mason, who lived on 10 Church Hill
Well,
for
there you go.
many years. And also
Wonderful. I'm hoping that there might have been some recognised.
There were two spinster sisters who
Right.
lived together, and the sister-in-law was Beth on Church Hill. She married their brother George.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you. That's really good. And again, I wanted to draw attention to the name of Hogbin again. Mr. Hogbin, Mrs. Hogbin, Miss E. Hogbin. She became Mrs. Eva Butterfield. And up here is another Mr. L. Hogbin. And they all lived together in 4 Littleton cottages. And I've only just discovered, with Steve's help, where Littleton cottages are. Right down the bottom of Church Hill, almost next door to the post office. But that's a long list of people, and the minister who had been involved was a lay pastor, Pastor Price, who lived in Dover. Now, 1929 was a big year for this building because an extension was erected at the back of the chapel to provide more space and more accommodation. And here, Joe's found this marvellous newspaper cutting of the photograph of the laying of the foundation stone. of the extension, which
Many
is
foundation stones.
foundation. Yes.
Well, we'll see a picture of those.
Yeah, here's the plan. You all know, you know where I'm referring to, don't you? Just down this, if you go down this side of the chapel, the door goes into this extension. Oh, look, pussycat.
Trixie had to make an appearance.
There's a story, I spoke to Gordon Newton, who used to be a minister here, and he said that in the final days of the chapel being a place of worship, on a Sunday morning, a cat used to come in and sit on the back pew, and at the end of the service would just get up and go home. Maybe it's your cat. Now, this is interesting. These are the foundation stones of the extension. Incidentally, Sue is sitting here, Sue Bolden, who lives in Elvington, has done a huge amount of research into Methodism in our locality. And there is somebody we know who owns the key that was presented for the door of your downstairs extension. Yes, so we've got that. But here you'll see, Buckland Society. That means the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel in Buckland. The Snargate Street, there was a very, very active Wesleyan chapel in Snargate Street. Right next door to the Grand Shaft. This is Wesley Hall, that's now on the corner of Folkestone Road, which has been part of Dover College. Do you know where I mean? The roundabout where the petrol station is, and then these are individual people who've made contributions, and here this stone laid by the minister at the time, and another one in memory here. But then there's another one we want to have a look at, I particularly wanted to mention, thinking of the legacy of this church, laid on behalf of the East Kent Coalfields Conference Commission by Sir Walter Berry. Now, in 1929, I've discovered that between 1921 and 1931, the population of Elvington and Aythorne doubled in 10 years, largely because of the working population at Tilmanston Mine. And the Methodist Church, what we call connectionally, the national organisation of the Methodist Church, set up a commission to raise funds to enable the local Methodist people to preach the gospel and support and encourage the working community in the Kent coalfields. And when I had some responsibilities recently, that commission, that money is still being used for social improvement. The latest one I knew about was a chaplaincy at Blue Water Shopping Centre. There is a multi-faith chaplaincy that is established at Blue Water, and the money that was originally invested for the coalfields is now given towards other social improvement possibilities. I think that's a great legacy for this church. There it was as it was originally. Here it is with our extension on the back. I think that must have been taken pretty soon after it was built, I would have thought, don't you? Oh, I just thought you'd like this picture. This is, I've mentioned Eva Butterfield. Eva Butterfield, some of you know her name. She was the caretaker here. She was the organist, the Sunday school teacher. She was all kinds of things. And she is related to Carol. Carol's father is related to Mr. Hogbin, the very same Hogbin. And here is Mr. Hogbin, Walter, and I'm not sure what her saying. Ethel, thank you, Joe. Look at that. Ethel and Joe. We think on their 60th wedding anniversary. Picture was taken in 1963. Now, any guesses whether I don't think it was taken in the chapel. But I thought, I've been given that photograph by Eva Butterfield. We'll be hearing more about her. Yes, so in 1930, you probably all know that Methodist churches across the whole of the country were established by trust deeds. And we had to appoint bodies of trustees for every chapel. And these are the trustees who were appointed in 1930, the new trust, 1930, after the extension was built. Some names here you might know. Ernest Woodland was a very prominent Methodist. Frederick Grabham is another name that there is a Mrs. Grabham who lives in Mill Lane now. And I was just interested to see that of all these people, only 2 live in Shepherdswell. Frederick Grabham at Westcourt Farm and Sidney Ruck in Westcourt Road. All the others live in Dover or Folkestone.
Andrew Clark.
Now,
top.
We've got a
yeah, thank you.
handout.
Thank
King's,
you.
King's Proclamation.
Going around, Joe's very kindly reproduced this for you to see. We wanted to think about the social impact. In 1917, the King made a proclamation, and you'll see here, to be read by the preacher from the pulpit on 4 successive Sundays in May, is that May?
Mid.
I think. 1917, by command of the King. And it's very interesting, I think, that we're meeting now when the person who was going to lay the foundation stone couldn't come because of the Franco-Prussian War, and when the latest news from Ukraine today is even worse than it has been for a long time. These things do affect our social background, and that's an interesting document that would have been used and proclaimed here in this chapel. There, Joe's found this, don't waste bread. That was the message from the King. And how appropriate that is today, isn't it, with Ukraine? Well, now I put this here because I don't know if you agree with me, but our history, our social history, is not only what you read about, but it's also what you hear. And what I want to try and say tonight is that it's what has been sung and said and proclaimed in this building has resonance. And I think that's important. Our history is something that we need to hear. And this is something that would have been sung in this chapel with great gusto. And I do know from various people amongst you that the monthly songs of praise that used to be